LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 2nd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 13 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. The topic I'm covering, the main topic, is Biden, Trump killed Reaganism. That seemed to be, you'll see, I've seen that discussed on a lot of different news programs. Earlier this week I saw Chris Hayes on All In with Chris Hayes say he stole the idea from Michelle Goldberg, and she said she stole it from someone else, but you'll see both NBC and Fox News, they cover it in different ways. The end of big government, the end of big government, and that's the who killed Reaganism, or Biden and Trump killed Reaganism, as I'll explain as I go through the clips. I have 13 clips. There's a link down in the video description to my clip list if you want to follow along on my notes. The first three are very brief. They're my political comedy clips for this week. And also before I get to the main topic, I will have a long clip of Tim Scott sort of revisiting last week's topic, which was police reform now, ? And Tim Scott not only gave the response to President Joe Biden's faux State of the Union, his address to a joint session of Congress, which really isn't the State of the Union. Tim Scott gave the rebuttal, and he's also the only black Republican in the Senate. There are only two black Democrats, and he's the point person for the Republicans in the Senate on police reform. He had his own bill that got filibustered by Democrats last year, and I talked about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that passed the House, and now they're trying to compromise between the Democrats' George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and Tim Scott's, I can't remember the name of his bill, but it's much weaker on police reform, and I'll talk about that when I get to that Newsmaker clip. But the political comedy I wanted to show you all is backing up something I've been talking about for weeks, and I haven't really shown any proof of it. Hold on just a second, let me make sure everything's... Oh, look at this. Sorry, little technical thing going on there, but so the three short clips I want to show you back up what I've been saying about Fox News, how they not only forever they've been a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, as they were created to be by Roger Ailes, as described by Gabriel Sherman in this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room. And then, of course, I made hundreds of examples of Fox News bias, pretty much in the first half of my 15-year YouTube career. I've been doing these Sunday live shows for the second half. But what I've been saying since Trump left office, they've really gone back to being a mouthpiece for Republican talking points. And I don't even really have to show you news stories. One thing they've been doing, Fox News has always been a pioneer in the graphics department. And it used to be that news programs would only come up with these like special introductory graphics for big historic events, like war in Iraq or impeachment of Bill Clinton. But Fox News is like always having breaking news and always having these like introductory graphics that they're not like news events. They're really just like Republican talking points. And I'm going to show you three of them here. The first one is actually from Friday before last. I saw this. This is kind of what I was talking about, I think, last week. This is how they introduce Biden's his what he was going to talk about in his faux State of the Union, his rescue package, or the infrastructure package, the American Rescue Plan that was passed, and the infrastructure package, and then the other legislation that you'll see discussed in the news summaries coming up. This is the little intro graphic that they were using on, this is America's Newsroom, so this is the first supposedly straight news program right after Fox and Friends, hosted by Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino, although 1 week there's this, what's her name? Gillian Turner is actually the one who is in for Dana Perino as the co-host in this first clip, where you'll see it's Biden's spending spree. I'm not even making that up. Here's just your typical Fox News graphic from about 9 days ago over here.
Well, get ready to dig deep into your wallet. President Biden's preparing to unveil the second phase of the government spending plan next week. It comes with an additional price tag of $1.5 trillion. He's planning to pay for the wish list of new items by raising taxes, he says, on America's wealthiest. Mark Meredith joins us from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Good morning, Mark.
So yeah, sorry, it's Biden's tax and spending spree. And not only do they have the graphic to introduce it, and they used it twice there for some reason, but you notice at the bottom of the Fox News chyron, they have it as like this subtitle or whatever, tax and spending spree. And the one that I've seen them use that for the most is, and you know, a few weeks ago I did my live stream. The title was Border Crisis ? And I made up this whole metaphor. I think it was the next week about how, you know, it's basically all these people are coming, running, knocking on your door, asking for help. It's not really like a door knocking crisis. You have to find out like what's driving all these people. Like in the metaphor I used, it was like the zombie apocalypse is not a door knocking crisis just because all these people are running, knocking on your door, asking for help. It's actually the zombies, and in this case it's problems in the Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And I discussed that a few weeks ago, how the border crisis itself is a misframing of the issue. But over on Fox News, of course, it's not just, and they use this over and over again. This is the most used graphic, and like I said, at the end, if you watch, they have the Biden's border crisis as the little subtitle of their chyron, as you can see over in this clip that I let go. Is this the one? Oh yeah, this, and I put a little bonus thing here where I show you how Fox News makes fun of how the President of the United States couldn't find his mask for like 30 seconds because they love making fun of masks in general and Biden, you know, bumbling in particular. And that starts off this clip before the Biden's border crisis. I think this is from last Thursday here.
However, in Georgia on that stop, the president couldn't find his mask, and this is what happened after that.
The Biden first 100 days has been very successful for the cartels, for the drug smugglers, for the human traffickers who are profiteering off of all the migrants who come across the border illegally. The Border Patrol officers are fully occupying processing all these migrants, and that leaves open miles of border that the cartels can come across.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott attacking President Biden's immigration policies. Now, over in Arizona, Border Patrol arrested an MS-13 gang member who tried to cross into the U.S. illegally. Agents also caught migrants attempting to smuggle more than 100 pounds of meth in their backpacks. Casey Stiegel back on the border for us. He's in Laredo, Texas. Hi, Casey.
I mean, they're not really trying to hide that they're trying to scare people. And they even go on to show like scary video of migrants coming over the border, and this woman saying, well, they seem to be really intent on just going through my property and getting up north as quickly as possible, but I'm scared they're going to stop and start harassing me. I don't know why, I just have that feeling. That's actually what comes right after that clip, and it's really about making the border crisis scary, and of course making it Biden's border crisis, as you saw from both the graphic and the subtitle on the chyron. And then the last example of this I'm going to show you, and there are multiple ones. I saw, what was it, like reading, writing, and racism when they talk about critical race theory. I almost took that clip, but I just thought I'd keep it to 3. And this one introduces the police reform now follow-up topic I promised, where I'm going to talk about Tim Scott and his take on qualified immunity, which is kind of ridiculous. And then, is America a racist country? That's the clip after next. But before I get to that, you have to see And this has to do with the case I talked about last week from North Carolina, the Andrew Brown Jr. shooting, and I watched the entire press conference where they brought in the family and the lawyers, but they only let the local lawyer and not like the out-of-state lawyers come in, and they only showed them 20 seconds of the video. That's important to know, watching this Fox News graphic about police under siege, that even though there are like 8 police officers who killed this guy in a hail of bullets, and now they're saying, well, his car backed up and bumped an officer or something. But even in this summary, you'll see Bill Hemmer admits that they were, this is Bill Hemmer, right? Yeah, Bill Hemmer admits that he's driving away, and then says it contradicts the family's story, even though the family only got to see the 20 seconds when he was driving away and being killed in a hail of gunfire. So that's the context for this final police under siege Fox News graphic that I find as just comical when it comes to journalism. And I see people saying, oh, it's true. Well, maybe it's an opinion. This is like something you'd see on the opinion page of a newspaper, but is this journalism? Is Bill, here you see supposedly straight news anchor Bill Hemmer showing something that is not straight news at all in the final political comedy clip to start the show over here.
Right about 20 past the hour now from North Carolina. The story unfolding around Andrew Brown Jr. Prosecutors saying that Brown hit cops twice before his car started moving away from them, and that's when they opened fire, which contradicts the claims made by the Brown family attorneys.
And I talked about how last week how Fox News is pro-cop, and I think police under siege as the main topic area of 8 police officers kill a guy driving away in a hail of gunfire. Is that really police under siege? I don't think so. If you can disagree with me if you want in the comment section. But like I said, before I get to the 5 news summaries from the big 5 corporate outlets, and by the way, the source of all my video clips are at links down in the video description. And I put a link to America's Newsroom, which, like I said, is the first supposedly straight show after Fox and Friends, which doesn't even, America's Newsroom isn't pretending to be journalism in any of those clips I just showed. Are they? Is it even arguable that it's opinion. It's loosely based on some facts, but it's not a straight news presentation. And they also have been covering this, like, is America a racist nation question, which, as far as I'm concerned, and that's what Senator Tim Scott is about to be asked about on CBS News' Face the Nation, talking to John Dickerson in this next clip, in addition to talking about qualified immunity, which I talked about several weeks ago, which is, I've done so much talking, maybe I should show this. I think maybe the longest clip that I want to try to remember to talk about qualified immunity, and I want to talk about America as a racist nation. Remind me in the comment section, because we're about to watch 5 minutes and 50 seconds of Tim Scott talking first about police reform and then talking about this whole talking point, is America, what does that question even mean? Is America a racist nation? The one thing I'll leave you with on that is, it's like, it almost reminds me of like the Stephen King novel Pet Sematary, like that ground is evil, it's cursed, it's like America's a racist nation. Well, no, America, it's some people in America are racist. There are a lot of racist institutions, and Tim Scott even seems to admit that, and the racist institutions and people being victims of racism, it's... Anyway, like I said, I've talked too long. I will talk about all of that a little more with you after we watch. I believe this is the longest clip of the night, but it's really important stuff. And if you want to know about the racism inherent in the mass incarceration system, just read this book over here, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. All the evidence and facts you need to prove it are right in there, going back to Reagan and the Southern strategy. But didn't I say I was going to play the clip and talk later? I will do that and talk to you on the other side after we watch together over here.
Let me ask you about the question of qualified immunity, just to remind people this is a legal framework that, on the one hand, some people say protects police who are acting in good faith. Critics say that it's a shield when police cross the line. That has been a major sticking point. You have offered a proposal that says allowed civil suits to sue the department and not the individual police officer. Are you finding Democratic support for that?
I am, actually, which is another reason why I'm more optimistic this time. What we want to do is make sure that the bad apples are punished, and we've seen that through convictions from Michael Slager in 2015 when he shot Walter Scott in the back, and to recently, just last several days, on the George Floyd convictions. Those are promising signs, but the real question is, how do we change the culture of policing? I think we do that by making the employer responsible for the actions of the employee. We do that with doctors, we do that with lawyers, we do that in most all of our industries. And if we do that in law enforcement, the employer will change the culture. So as opposed to having one officer change or not change, we'll have all officers transforming because the departments are taking on more of that burden. And frankly, as I spoke with family members on Thursday, they were very receptive to that proposal because what they're looking for is something that shows progress. I think that does it.
When you talk about changing the culture, I wonder what your assessment is of, in your own party, how many people think there is a need for police reform at all? Tucker Carlson is very influential with Republicans, and he quoted you and many others who said after the Chauvin verdict, there's more work to be done. You're talking about changing that culture, and he seemed to think that was not a legitimate position. What's your feeling about that?
Well, one of the reasons why I started our conversation, John, with reality, that as a United States Senator, I've been stopped several times in the last 3 years in the Capitol and on the streets throughout the country. So I'm not having a conversation about some theory or philosophy. I'm saying that there is a way for us to restore more confidence from communities of color and say to our officers, we want character-driven officers responding to crises in neighborhoods. Those are two things that we can accomplish. I think my party, significant numbers in my party, have already said to me, we will go where you go on this issue as long as I can explain my position, and we're going to do that.
Let me ask you about your theory about race. You said America is not a racist country in your response to the president. The president has subsequently said he agrees with you. But you've also said, so there's some common ground there. You've also said to suggest there aren't racial challenges and patterns is for someone to be blind. And you've also said that the system is breaking the back and breaking the spirit of millions of people in our country. And you're talking about Black Americans who are being affected by that system. So help people understand when you say it's not a racist country, but then you do talk about a system that targets Black Americans. You've talked about it today. Help people square those two statements.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first, let me say, thank goodness that finally our president, our vice president, and one of the leaders in the Democrat caucus in the House, Jim Clyburn, have all come forward and said exactly what I've been saying for a long time. America is not a racist country. The question is there a lingering effect after a couple of centuries of racism and discrimination in this nation? The answer is absolutely. The question we should be debating and fighting over is how do we resolve those issues going forward? One side says, I'm going to take from some to give to others. Fighting bigotry with bigotry is hypocrisy. It just doesn't work. The second, our side, what I've suggested is let's expand opportunity and make sure that we are fully equipped for the challenges of the future. One of the reasons why we have fought for and won the highest level of funding for historically Black colleges, Republicans leading that fight, is because I understand that if I can level the playing field in education, we will actually see human flourishing like we've never seen before. If we focus our attention in healthcare, as we have on sickle cell anemia, or on opportunity zones for bringing resources into poor communities, we'll see what we have seen, which is the unemployment rates hitting all-time lows for African Americans, Hispanics, 70-year low for women. Those things actually matter, John.
Yeah, but when you say one side is talking about taking from one side to the other, I mean, this is, people pay taxes, and there's an argument that the taxes that are paid should go to communities that we've seen, especially under COVID-19, have been disproportionately affected, and that's laid bare a lot of the inequities. So you're not saying that making sure that there's money that goes to those black communities is a bad thing.
Well, John, let me say it differently. When you pass a COVID package with $2 trillion of spending, and in your package you hide in there, if you are a black farmer, we will give you resources, but if you are a white farmer, you're excluded from those same resources. That's taking from one to give to the other. It's one of the reasons why in the 1990s, the USDA had to pay out the Pickford settlements to black farmers for taking from them to give the white farmers. So we're going to reverse that and call that a way of creating fairness in our country? That doesn't really work.
Of course, they would argue that they're trying to deal with that system and the inequities you talk about. But let me ask you about taxes here.
Yeah, John Dickerson did a pretty good job there. That little cleanup there after he says, like paying black farmers more because historically they got screwed by the system that aided farming from the Department of Agriculture. I mean, that actually does make sense. And if you know about like redlining and all sorts of historic discrimination, I have a couple books behind me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and one is it this one? Yeah, We Were 8 Years in Power There. That's a series of essays he wrote, including one in favor of exploring reparations, which does a great job of talking about all the ways historically that black Americans have been disadvantaged economically by a series of different laws and policies, and the GI Bill. They were kept out of the benefits of the GI Bill, and I mean, over and over again, there's so many examples that I won't go into, but I think refute what Tim Scott is saying about, I mean, that's the thing. You recognize that a community has not been invested in, and you make up for it by now investing in that community. And he's saying that means you're fighting discrimination with discrimination, which is like, you find the people who got screwed before and you help lift them up now. I mean, in both cases, discrimination just means like telling difference between types of people, like people who are suffering from the results of historically racist policies. That's what affirmative action's all about, is lifting up people who have been the victims of historic racism. And you can't have an affirmative action policy unless you have race consciousness to uplift people who have been historically discriminated against. And anyway, I've blathered on about that part long enough, and I saw some people. Who did I see? Somebody in the live comments. There was a super chat contribution from Lulu Girl reminding everyone to give me a thumbs up. Thank you for that. And Sinful Solutions, just keep it up. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's what Christopher L. Perez Cruz was another one of the points I was going to make that John Dickerson didn't do, with that whole thing about qualified immunity and doctors and lawyers. There was no follow-up on that, and that was kind of ridiculous, because for doctors and lawyers, you do hold both the employer and doctor. I'm a lawyer myself, and I know about medical malpractice, that just for negligence, they can be sued just for negligence, and cops can only be sued under qualified immunity if they are violating a clearly established constitutional right, which means these exact same circumstances have to have happened before. And this also applies to the departments, although the departments often settle. But I showed you this Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals case several weeks ago. I keep harping on this, but there's so many horror stories from qualified immunity, and that just means you can't go to court. If if the court finds qualified immunity, you can't go to court. And in this Fifth Circuit case, they tased a guy who had like doused himself in gasoline and threatened to kill himself and burn his house down. And when they tased him, it killed him and burned his house down. I hear Sandy barking off in the distance, which may mean that I've been talking for too long. But that is, and so qualified immunity, just holding the employers responsible. I hope that doesn't end up being the compromise. And I think I talked about whether America is racist or not way too long before I showed the clip. So now I'm actually going to get to the news summaries. And the first one, the longest and best one, and the Chuck Todd has the longest package again, which is, as usual, Chuck Todd starts off the show with his live introduction and then goes to the pre-recorded package, which I was already, like I said, after seeing that All In with Chris Hayes episode where he talked to Michelle Goldberg about this whole Trump and Biden killed Reaganism thing. I was already kind of thinking of various permutations of that title for my video this week, and the first show I watched this morning was NBC News' Meet the Press, and that was obviously the narrative, the framing that they had decided on. Of course, MSNBC and NBC are the same, so are siblings at least, and so it's not that surprising. And because I've talked so long, I will just show you that clip. This is, like I said, the longest and best news summary, a little under 5 minutes, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. In his 1981 inaugural address, President Ronald Reagan captured the nation's growing frustration with big government.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
15 years later, in 1996, a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, admitted the defeat of activist government.
The era of big government is over.
Then this past Wednesday, in his speech to Congress, President Joe Biden tried to put a stake in both of those ideas, declaring that the era of big government being over is now over. In the process, Mr. Biden also made clear that the idea that he intends to be a transitional president, well, that's also over too. He intends to be a transformational one. The president's goals are ambitious, far-reaching, and yes, expensive. Will voters care about the scope of Mr. Biden's plans? Well, here's one clue. 55% of adults in our new NBC News poll say the government should do more to solve our problems, versus 41% who say the government is doing too much. How about, will voters care about the price tag? Possibly. But President Trump and the Republicans may have made it a bit easier for Mr. Biden by spending big themselves, cutting taxes for the wealthy, and running up the deficit on their watch. So Mr. Biden is making a $6 trillion bet that promoting popular programs will be popular, and that he'll be rewarded for getting things done long before the actual bill comes due.
I don't have any inordinate faith in government, but there's certain things only the government can do.
President Biden making the case for the largest expansion of government programs in decades.
These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make.
It's a reimagining of the role of government in American life, extending an argument made by Barack Obama, but never fully implemented given his political constraints.
We have never been a people who place all of our faith in government to solve our problems. We shouldn't want to. But we don't think the government is the source of all our problems either.
It gained momentum during a Democratic primary campaign that pushed the party to the left.
I get a little bit tired of Democrats afraid of big ideas.
The $1.8 trillion American Families Plan proposes universal pre-K, 2 years of tuition-free community college, and expanded paid family and medical leave. It comes on top of a $2.2 trillion infrastructure proposal and after a $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. To pay for some of these initiatives, White House officials are proposing tax increases on corporations and the wealthiest Americans.
The American Family Plan does 4 things. and we pay for it all. One, without raising the deficit.
Biden is betting Americans are open to an activist government. 82% of Democrats, 60% of independents, and even a quarter of Republicans say government should do more to solve the country's problems. It's the opening of what is likely to be a summer slugfest.
There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Think about how much money he is spending.
He doesn't want to talk about how it's going to get paid for.
If I ever hear that Joe Biden's a moderate again, I'm going to throw up.
Republicans, now concerned about deficits, argued Donald Trump's 2017 tax cuts would pay for themselves.
I worry about deficits, but you're not going to get out of this problem until you grow the economy.
I'm totally convinced this is a revenue-neutral bill, actually a revenue producer.
It wasn't, and the deficit grew substantially. Now some Senate Democrats are already hinting at deficit spending. Hawaii's Brian Schatz telling Axios, "I'm not a big pay-for guy." Connecticut's Chris Murphy, quote, "I don't know that it needs to be fully paid for." And Montana's John Tester, "I think we should find a way to pay for half of it up front." To get his plans through Congress, Biden needs to get centrist Democrats on board.
It's a lot. I mean, we're talking millions and trillions of dollars we need to pay for. We do.
And the president has to hold progressives who are defying the White House and pursuing a massive expansion of Medicare after a health care overhaul was left out of Biden's plans.
I just think it's the wrong approach. We need to take on those lobbyists and big pharma companies that are so willing to pour millions into defeating any kind of reform.
And joining me now is the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. Secretary Yellen, welcome to Meet the Press.
And I don't have any Janet Yellen clips for you because I kept hoping he was going to ask, or the topic of modern monetary theory was going to come up, because I think that may be one of the things that helped kill Reaganism. I've seen some people on the right citing this. You know, they talked about how they did the Trump tax cut with Republican votes, cost $1.5 trillion or whatever. It didn't pay for itself, and they didn't care. But there was a lot more things going on in the Trump era. Of course, after COVID, they passed all trillions of dollars of relief bills. There's the big one at the beginning, and then a pretty big one right after the election with Nancy Pelosi. Finally coming, you know, anyway. If you've been watching the show every Sunday, you know what I'm talking about. But they passed trillions of dollars in spending, and it was actually a good thing. That's one reason the U.S. economy has been least affected by the coronavirus pandemic, because of all the government spending. And there's this thing, modern monetary theory, that I don't want to go into in depth, but it basically it says that deficit spending isn't really harmful to a country's economy as long as it hasn't reached full productivity, as long as there's still like unemployed people, and inflation isn't really something to worry about, because if it starts to happen, you know, because inflation happens because there's like too much money and not enough things to spend it on, and the government can just, and that's what deficit spending is. It basically, governments can just print money instead of getting the money in taxes. If they don't get enough money in taxes, they can just print extra money. And inflation happens when there's too much money and not enough stuff to buy, but then the government can take back that money either through by cutting spending, so there's less money from the government in the economy, or by raising taxes, which takes money back out of the economy. So, and that is a theory that I heard people on the right wing espousing during the Trump years, and I don't know if that helped kill Reaganism. But anyway, that's why I didn't take a Janet Yellen clip there, because I was hoping they were going to talk about that, but they didn't talk about that. But I think this, I'm not an economist, but I would like to hear in the comment section if anyone has any comments about modern monetary theory, because based on the deficit spending I've seen since the Reagan years, that's the thing about Reaganism. He said small government and cut spending and lower taxes, but all they really did was the lower taxes. They didn't really decrease government or decrease spending. They just increased deficits. So even Reaganism wasn't Reaganist, in the sense that it was supposed to be small government and cutting taxes. it was more a rhetorical thing, and maybe it slowed the growth of government a little bit. But I mean, I remember there was a huge defense buildup. It was just they cut some of the social programs, which really weren't that big a part of government spending. But I'm going off on a big tangent here, and I now... First Sandy was barking, now Dash is mewing for no reason off in the distance. It's hard to keep from getting distracted here, but I did want to transition to the next two news summaries. And I said that the NBC News Meet the Press one was the longest and best one. Well, that's if your lens is on the United States as the whole world, which where COVID-19, even though I was worried about the fourth wave seemed to be more of some hotspots, kind of like Dr. Scott Gottlieb on CBS News' Face the Nation was saying, not so much the real fourth wave that Michael Osterholm was talking about when I was talking about it was one versus the other. And I was actually thought, based on the bad behavior I've seen from a lot of people and a lot of people around the country traveling and gathering, I thought there was going to be a fourth wave, and so far it looks like it's not really going to happen, at least maybe not till the winter. That's something else Scott Gottlieb said. But just because it's not a big story in the United States doesn't mean that it's not a big story or the biggest story, especially in India, where calamitous things are happening. But of course, most of the corporate news media has a very strong focus on what's happening in the United States, as do most Americans. We're fairly fairly isolationist in that way, I guess, but I don't know. I'm thinking of another word, but it's slipping my mind. So I'll move on to the next two news summaries. The one from CBS and then ABC, which actually do both focus on COVID. Now, I'm kind of cheating with the CBS News Face the Nation news summary because it didn't come at the beginning of the program. At the beginning of the program, John Dickerson just said hello and then went right to Ron Klain, the chief of staff for Joe Biden. And I didn't take any clips of that because I took that extended Tim Scott clip that we talked about earlier. But then about 30 minutes into the program, they did two reports. I'm going to show you the Mark Strassman one. Oh, and I saw someone posted on one of the recorded show viewers posted, Mark Strassman lives in Atlanta. That's why he's always reporting from Atlanta. So I guess that solves that mystery. But there was this thing where they were talking about how he was like knocking on the door of the CDC every week during the Trump administration, and no one would ever talk to him because they weren't allowed to talk to the news media, or because they were all throttled by the Trump political appointees or whatever. And that's a story that remains to be told, I guess. But anyway, Mark Strassman does a report from Atlanta on Disney in California. Like, that makes sense. But they at least did focus on COVID. And then you'll see I keep this clip running all the way to Elizabeth Palmer, who does a report. Well, anyway, I've talked long enough. I will show you the first of the two COVID-related news summaries. This is from halfway into CBS News' Face the Nation this morning. Over here.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We turn now to the battle against COVID-19. Mark Strassman has more from Atlanta.
COVID America is eager for moments of magic. Disneyland obliged.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome home.
13 months after viral dread sidelined Mickey and Minnie, the California park has reopened, though changed like all of us.
You have to have the ears, the whole outfit, and now you have to have the mask too.
To pandemic officials, the real pixie dust is injected, not sprinkled, and needs more believers.
If you go to a hospital or worse, you die, all because you chose to not get vaccinated, that would really be a tragedy.
More than 1 in 4 Americans has been fully vaccinated. As a daily average, 2.6 million more people got a shot over the last week. That's down sharply. The shortfall is demand, not supply. In the Northwest, a plea for young people to get the shot as cases start to spike again. Take Oregon. Hospitalizations have nearly doubled in the past week.
COVID-19 is now knocking more younger people off their feet.
Millions of Americans refuse to give the vaccine a shot.
We will not be silenced.
Some are never vaxxers. Others assert freedom of choice. But to most objectors, it's the science, a vague, visceral skepticism that Operation Warp Speed moved too fast. At stake, America's herd immunity, keeping new variants at bay and getting fully on the other side of this pandemic.
It's your first time here?
It is.
The economy is getting there.
In general, we're already back to the pre-COVID levels.
People want to spend. Help wanted signs are everywhere, even on the menu.
I've hired more people now that never worked in restaurants before than ever.
They're gearing up for a hot summer in Las Vegas, the Disneyland for adults.
When will Vegas be back? To all those who ask, the comeback is here now.
Same for here in Georgia. A rollback of COVID restrictions starting this weekend for businesses including gyms and movie theaters. Restaurant staff no longer have to wear masks. And all of that is worrisome to health officials. John?
Mark Strassman, thank you. The situation in the United States is definitely improving, but that's not the case in some other parts of the world. Here's senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer.
Good morning. Mass vaccination is at last bringing COVID under control in Europe, but there are still hot spots across the world right now, first and foremost in India. Yes.
So, yeah, and then Elizabeth Palmer goes on to talk about the dire circumstances in India. And, you know, I talked about how CBS has generally had the best COVID coverage. And there's a link down in the video description to CBS News' Face the Nation YouTube channel where they have all their segments split up into different videos that you can watch for free on YouTube, including the rest of Elizabeth Palmer's report. She covers the world. Mark Strassman covers the U.S. from Atlanta for some reason. So they did have really good, extensive coverage, both of COVID in the U.S. and COVID internationally and how bad things are in India. The weird thing about it is, you know, ABC is, the next clip I'm going to show you is the ABC News Summary. ABC is owned by Disney, but Mark Strassman had this weird Disney theme news summary, and it was like he's a lifelong Disney fan or something, because there was like, first there was this metaphor, like Disney is back, but it's changed by the pandemic, like all of us have been changed by the pandemic, because aren't we all Disney? And then, you know, then there was that whole like pixie dust metaphor, like there's vaccine hesitancy because, you know, but it's like pixie dust we have to believe in, like Tinkerbell's pixie dust. You have to believe for the vaccine to work. And he talked about the anti-vaxxers and the people, you know, it is under emergency use authorization, the vaccines. And one thing I talked about early on is nobody knows what side effects occur after you take the vaccine, you know, like 3 years after you take the vaccine, because no one has taken the vaccine, and because the vaccines were only administered in the last year, so even in the trials. I've taken both my shots of the Pfizer, and hopefully it won't turn me, you know, into a zombie 3 years from now or whatever, but I talked about how that's kind of ridiculous, and some of the weird conspiracy theories about how messenger RNA can be spread by respiration. And anyway, that's all ridiculous. And I think that Mark Strassman kind of covered that. And Elizabeth Palmer did a good job with the international stuff, although I just ding them a little bit in my media criticism because they didn't do that news summary till 30 minutes in, and ABC in this next news summary you're going to see, Martha Raddatz starts right off with COVID and India especially, and how India is experiencing like all the things we feared at the worst in the United States that didn't happen, you know, where people are dying in the streets. There's like shortages and price gouging on oxygen tanks. The hospital systems are overwhelmed, shutting down. Like the healthcare system is collapsing under the weight of the COVID epidemic in India. It's just horrible. And that is, you'll see, this is the very beginning of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz reporting on that, talking to this New York Times reporter, Gettlemen. Is it Jeremy? Let me just double check my notes here. Double check these notes. Wrong notes. Jeffrey Gettlemen from the New York Times reporting on this bleak situation in India. I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news report from ABC this morning over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week, where we begin on a hopeful note this morning. The answer to that question we've been asking for more than a year, when can we get back to normal, finally seems within reach. While there is concern about a drop in those seeking vaccinations, more than 100 million Americans have been fully vaccinated, and COVID cases have continued to drop. The director of the CDC saying if this trend keeps up, July 1st, just 2 months from now, could be a reasonable reopening target, although this virus has tricked us before. President Biden touted that progress at his joint address to Congress Wednesday as he outlined his vision for America, expansive, sweeping initiatives, igniting a debate about the steep cost. But while the pandemic news here in America looks positive, the virus is still upending much of the rest of the globe. India in the grips of a crippling COVID surge, images of bodies being cremated around the clock, shocking, even after a year of heartbreaking COVID stories worldwide. The dire situation and concern over variants prompting restrictions on travel from India starting Tuesday. The New York Times South Asia Bureau Chief Jeffrey Gettlemen is based in New Delhi and has been sending powerful reports from his home there. We spoke with him a short time ago about the country's deepening crisis.
When I step out on my balcony, the first thing I smell is smoke. There are massive cremations that are taking place across this city and across this country. So many people are dying of coronavirus that it's creating these huge clouds of smoke that just hang over the cities. We're experiencing the worst crisis that coronavirus pandemic has produced anywhere at any time. Just about everybody I know has somebody in their family who's sick. And what's really scary is the healthcare system is collapsing around us. The hospitals are totally full. They're running out of medicine. They're running out of oxygen. People are racing around the city trying to get help. There are people who are dying on the streets because they can't find even the most basic things. And as we speak, the cases are growing. The government is reporting almost 400,000 infections, new infections every day, and maybe 4,000 deaths. But all the information we're getting is that's a gross understatement. So the problem here is way bigger than I think anybody realizes at this moment. And there's just this sense of fear circulating across the city right now.
And our thanks to Jeffrey Gettlemen. There's so much to discuss this morning with our first guest, President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Thanks for joining us.
I don't have any clips of Jake Sullivan. He's been on a bunch of programs for the last few weeks. I haven't taken a clip of him yet. I think I had some clips of him back before he was National Security Advisor. I have to go look through my old shows. But like I said, I would like to give kudos to ABC there for... That's like the first 3 minutes of their program where they really focused on something horrible happening in the COVID pandemic that doesn't immediately affect Americans, although, like I've been talking about for weeks, in terms of like Republicans who won't wear masks and take precautions, and you shouldn't just say, oh, who cares, survival of the fittest, less Republicans, or who cares, less people from India. But the thing is, not only should we care about both Republicans and people from India or people in India just because we care about human beings who are, I am you and you are me and we are all together, to quote the Beatles, right? But not just that. It's actually, if you're just selfish, it affects you, because if the pandemic is raging amongst just Republicans or just people in India or other hotspots in the developing world or whatever you want to call it, that means that it's out there mutating, maybe finding versions that evade immunity from having caught it or having been vaccinated. And there's a place where the virus is also surviving, so it can come back, and it's not like we don't have all this international interconnectedness. So kudos to ABC for showing that story that is both important in a human sense and important to Americans, even if they don't care about the lives of human beings in other countries or whatever. But anyway, this next news summary, this is from Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace, and then the reporter Mark Meredith. And it seems kind of like straight news, but I want to replay the very first clip I played for you about Biden's taxing and spending spree, and remind you that that was like the graphic and Chiron subtitle that Fox News was using 9 days ago on their supposedly straight news program, America's Newsroom. And it's a really important context to watch this next news summary with, because it's kind of the same talking points, just a little more subtle. But like, here's the less subtle version from that I showed you at the beginning.
Well, get ready to dig deep into your wallet. President Biden's preparing to unveil the second phase of the government spending plan next week. It comes with an additional price tag of $1.5 trillion. He's planning to pay for the wish list of new items by raising taxes, he says, on America's wealthiest. Mark Meredith joins us from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
So yeah, that's the less subtle version from like 9 days ago, but you still can see the same talking points in Fox News Sunday. Instead of like Reaganism is dead, it's more like Biden is trying to end Reaganism and go back to big government. But they don't really talk about how Republicans also helped kill Reaganism. That doesn't really come up in the Fox News Sunday news summary, but it does have sort of that same theme about Reaganism over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. It was 40 years ago when Ronald Reagan told the nation, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. Ever since, presidents, both Republicans and even Democrats, have played down the role of big government. Until now. President Biden is pushing $4 trillion in new spending and almost that much in new taxes. What happens to his plans over the next few months will tell us a lot about where our nation is headed. In a moment, we'll speak with one of the president's top economic advisors, Cecilia Rouse. But first, let's turn to Mark Meredith in Wilmington, Delaware, with the latest on prospects for the president's ambitious plans. Mark.
Chris, President Biden insists the country can afford to spend trillions and trillions of dollars, but Republicans are upset with more than just the price tag here. They argue the White House is trying to expand government bureaucracy for decades to come.
We're way behind the rest of the world right now.
President Biden says if the U.S. is to compete globally, Congress should spend trillions of dollars rebuilding roads, fighting climate change, and addressing poverty.
Certain things only the government can do. We rank number 8 in the world in terms of infrastructure, for God's sake.
On top of infrastructure spending, the White House wants an additional $1.8 trillion to fund universal preschool, 2 free years of community college, and more unemployment benefits. Republicans argue it's all a ploy to increase the government's role in Americans' daily lives.
As government expands, our liberty contracts.
I think many of these programs are designed to make the middle class dependent on government.
Even some Democrats, including West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, are raising concerns with the growing price tag of the president's proposals. Still, the White House believes a deal with a closely divided Congress is possible. The president plans to sit down with congressional leaders from both parties at the White House later this month.
While Congress negotiates this week, President Biden's going to be back out on the road trying to convince taxpayers to support these spending plans. He's going to be making stops in Virginia and Louisiana this week. Chris?
Mark Meredith traveling with the president in Delaware. Mark, thank you. And joining us now, Cecilia Rouse, chair of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Ms. Rouse, let's start by...
And I don't have Cecilia Rouse's clip, although I do have Bill Cassidy responding to her support or defense of Biden's big government taxing and spending or taxing and spending spree, which wasn't overtly mentioned in that last news summary, but it was kind of the subtext there. Mark Meredith had a pre-recorded package and that had like a handoff at the end, and then he had a live handoff at the end. Didn't he do like a double handoff at the end of that last clip? Tell me if I'm wrong, but anyway, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. But this next news summary is the shortest one. It's CNN State of the Union. Jake Tapper is back, and he is not having it with the Republican Party. You know, he used to do this State of the Cartoonian thing where because he draws cartoons and he would sort of narrate them, and it was kind of lighthearted, but he stopped doing that at the end of his program. Now he does this this like polemic, and this week it was about how the Republican Party has become the cult of lies, and you'll see that briefly mentioned at the end of the news summary at the very beginning of the program, where he always starts every week, what is the State of the Union this week? Well, according to my clip list, looking at clip number 9, the State of the Union is waiting to build bridges, literally and figuratively, because we're such a divided country, and we're also trying to come up with this infrastructure plan, and talks about some polling. And anyway, I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch that 76-second news summary from CNN State of the Union together from this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is trying to build bridges, literally and figuratively. President Biden's massive multi-trillion-dollar plans for the nation's infrastructure, as well as his plan to expand social safety net programs, are now being put to the test in a Congress more divided than at any time in modern history, as polls show a majority of Americans do nonetheless want political leaders to prioritize being bipartisan over achieving everything they want to accomplish. For many in the Republican Party, however, the focus seems to be elsewhere, too many continuing to embrace this culture of lying about Biden's proposals, about the election, about the vaccine, about the insurrection, and punishing their fellow Republican lawmakers who don't demonstrate adequate fealty to former President Trump, including on Saturday, booing the Republican presidential nominee from 2012, Mitt Romney. I'll talk to key moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins about the state of her party and whether bipartisanship is possible on the urgent issues facing the nation. That's ahead. But first, let's start with Biden's policy goals, all of which frankly face an uncertain future in the U.S. Senate. Might that lead to a change in tactics? Joining me now is senior advisor to President Biden, Anita Dunn. Anita, thanks for joining us today.
I don't have no Anita Dunn clip either. I do have the Susan Collins response to Mitt Romney getting booed, and all the things she says about the Republican Party kind of prove that the Republican Party she's talking about no longer exists, and she even talks about Reaganism. But that's the clip after next. Before I get to 3 Republicans, it'll be Susan Collins, then Bill Cassidy talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, and then finally John Barrasso from Wyoming. I decided since he's from Wyoming, which is even redder than Louisiana, this is going from left to right. Susan Collins from Maine is supposedly a Republican moderate, although I think she's a Republican who doesn't realize the party she thinks she belongs to no longer exists. But I'll talk about that more in the clip after next. First, here's Bernie Sanders talking to Chuck Todd about he really disses James Carville here. A quote from James Carville saying the Democratic Party can't be more liberal than Joe Manchin, because Joe Manchin, and I even made a video a few weeks ago, or my live stream a few weeks ago, was how like Joe Manchin rules America because he as the most conservative member of the Democratic Party. If they want to pass stuff with 50 votes plus the vice president, they need Joe Manchin. They need Kirsten Sinema from Arizona. They're like the most wobbly members of the 50 Democratic votes. But, well, I think Bernie Sanders has a good response and skewers James Carville a little bit in this, the only Democrat I'm showing before 3 Republicans. And I think it also kind of shows how Bernie Sanders is talking to Democrats and Republicans, just old people who need dental care and eyeglasses and hearing aids. These are like Fox News viewers he's talking to, but he's on NBC this week anyway, over in this clip.
One of the things not included in the president's plan was some things that you wanted to see, including lowering the eligibility age to Medicare, in particular being the biggest one there. And I want to ask you about it in conjunction with this statement that James Carville made, and I want to bring it up here. It has to do with Joe Manchin. He says, the Democratic Party can't be more liberal than Senator Joe Manchin. That's the fact. We don't have the votes. And I bring this up because Senator Manchin has said he's not in favor of lowering that eligibility age. Do you think that was probably why Joe Biden didn't include your provision in his plan?
No, I don't think so. James Carville can live in his world. I don't think he's terribly relevant to what happens in Congress right now. Here is the story, very simple story, is that right now, for the last 55 years, since Medicare was developed in 1965, it has not included coverage for dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses. And I can tell you, in Vermont and all over this country, you got senior citizens whose teeth are rotting in their mouth, older people who can't talk to their grandchildren because they can't hear them because they can't afford a hearing aid, and people who can't read a newspaper because they can't afford glasses. So to say that dental care and hearing aids and eyeglasses should be a part of Medicare makes all the sense in the world. Second of all, we're going to pay for this. This is a pay for. Right now, as I think every American understands, we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We're getting ripped off every day by the pharmaceutical industry, who in some cases charges us 10 times more for the same drug that's sold in Canada or in other countries. So what we want to do is what the American people want to do. We want to negotiate prescription drug prices with the industry through Medicare. When you do that, you save about $500 billion, and that can cover the cost of dental care, eyeglasses, and hearing aid under Medicare, as well as lowering the eligibility age to 60. That's what we have to do. We have a pay for that.
Before I let you go, we have, obviously, the virus is pretty out of control in India.
Well, you see, there on NBC, they also talked about the virus being out of control in India and talking about whether we should send them our vaccines. But you can watch Meet the Press at a link down in the video description. But, you know, I don't know. I wonder what it would have been like if Bernie Sanders ended up being the nominee and maybe elected president in 2016 or 2020. As my longtime viewers know, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the California primary, both in 2016 and 2020. But then in the general election, I had to vote for Hillary Clinton, and then I voted for our current president, Joe Biden. I'm even a registered Democrat, even though I consider myself, well, I don't know, I'm more left-leaning than many Democrats, though I've gotten in these weird arguments with some progressives or democratic socialists who think liberals are like the centrist moderates in the party. The word liberal gets attacked by people on Fox News and then gets attacked by like the democratic socialists and progressives in the Democratic Party. I feel like everybody's attacking me, but that's a whole other story for a different day. And now going from Bernie Sanders to the increasingly conservative Republicans, I'm going to show you in the next 3 clips, which apparently Sandy's whining about. The next one, maybe Sandy's whining because she's sick of Susan Collins pretending that, talk about Bernie Sanders saying James Carville lives in his world or whatever. Susan Collins seems to think this Republican Party that's based on principles, and you'll see she even cites Reagan here, saying, if someone agrees with you 75-80% of the time, then you should agree with them. And the Republican Party is about these principles, not a cult or following one person, which wrong Republican Party, doesn't exist, which I will talk about with you a little more after you see Jake Tapper question Susan Collins on that topic on CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
Republican Party, your fellow Republican Senator Mitt Romney, who I believe is a friend of yours, he was booed by delegates at the Utah Republican Convention yesterday. What was your reaction when you saw that clip of him being booed and the close vote to censure him?
I was appalled. Mitt Romney is an outstanding senator who serves his state and our country well. We Republicans need to remember that we are united by fundamental principles such as a belief in personal responsibility, individual freedom, opportunity, free markets, a strong national defense. Those are the principles that unite us. We are not a party that is led by just one person. There are many prominent, upcoming younger men and women in our party who hold great promise for leading us. And I think that all of us who abide by those principles should remember Ronald Reagan's admonition to Republicans that the person who agrees with you 70 or 80% of the time is your friend, not your enemy.
And yet, if you look at what's going on in the House among Republicans, I mean, some Republicans, including Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, are attacking and trying to undermine Congresswoman Liz Cheney just for fist-bumping Biden on the floor, also for speaking out against Trump's lies about the election. They're obviously also upset she voted to impeach the president. Is it politically dangerous to be a Republican like Liz Cheney, who tries to stand up for facts and truth regarding the election and the insurrection?
Liz Cheney is a woman of strength and conscience, and she did what she felt was right, and I salute her for that. We need to be accepting of differences in our party. We don't want to become like too much of the Democratic Party, which has been taken over by the progressive left. We need to have room for a variety of views, especially since we adhere to those core principles that I mentioned earlier.
After President Trump was impeached for the first time for urging Ukraine's president to...
And yeah, Jake Tapper did continue questioning her, and I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. But I want to show two increasingly less rational Republicans, and I'm not saying that Susan Collins is rational. I actually criticized that clip, saying she's living in her own world for a Republican Party that doesn't exist, but at least she's trying to pretend that the Republican Party is based on facts. And these next two guys, Bill Cassidy and John Barrasso, are increasingly off in what Jake Tapper called this culture of lies in the previous CNN clips I showed. This is Bill Cassidy talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, and this is what I was talking about, how Trump and the Republicans promised all this free stuff in their COVID relief packages, and Trump was like putting his name on the checks they were sending out, and sending out all these subsidies to farmers, and just having no real, Republican principles with the tariffs, when Republicans are supposed to be free traders, and then they fix it with subsidies. And then Trump even picked winners and losers in the marketplace by telling executives from corporations not, don't close down your factories, open your, all that non-free market stuff. And anyway, Chris Wallace talks about how the Biden plan is giving all this great stuff that Bill Cassidy, senator from Louisiana, his constituents actually need. And Bill Cassidy doesn't even hardly acknowledge it, just talks of, these like old Reagan-esque talking points that are now dead according to the title of my video, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
There's a lot in there which is easily disputed. She talks about big government being essential to vaccine development. Pfizer did not take federal dollars, for example, to get that vaccine. It was the Trump administration and Congress given regulatory flexibility. I would argue the era of bigger government coming back will thwart the progress we need to make. And I think we can see recent history about how that is exactly true.
Well, let's look, though, at some of the key provisions in the president's jobs plan and in his family's plan. And I want to put them up on the screen. $100 billion for workforce development. $400 billion to care for the elderly and disabled, $225 billion for child care, and $200 billion for free preschool. Senator, which of those programs that I just put up, which of those programs do you think people in your state don't need?
Every one of those programs should be evaluated. If it's important, it should be advanced. It's not infrastructure. When people say, wait a second, I like this because we need a new bridge across the Calcasieu River in Lake Charles, I'm saying this plan will not give it to you. The amount of spending for roads and bridges is so low that, and split between 50 states over 5 years, you're not going to get your bridge. Now, we may need this. By the way, we just are restarting our bipartisan working group to come at family support for the dependent, children and elderly. But that is not going to give you a road and bridge, and that's what people in my state would really like to see.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, and we could argue, and I have back and forth with both sides about infrastructure, but there are a lot of programs that aren't infrastructure, and the question I'm asking you is, would you support the government paying for them? I mean, I looked into it. In your state of Louisiana, the rate of child poverty is 25%. 1 in 4 of the children in Louisiana are in poverty. And according to the White House, 42% of residents in Louisiana do not have access to child care. So wouldn't they benefit? Forget whether it's infrastructure or not, wouldn't they benefit from these government programs?
So I don't know if they would. If you think about the main driver of elevating out of poverty, it's good education. Now, what we saw in the pandemic was teachers' unions keeping schools shut, even when the Centers for Disease Control said it was safe to go back. The president wants to give universal pre-K, run by the same teachers' unions. Now, if you're in Chicago and there's more money going to the school systems and to the unions, and yet they still won't open, not because the CDC says it's not safe, but because they don't want to, your kids are not going to have a better education. They're just not. So whether or not these programs benefit those who need it, we don't know, because it's going through a system which is so poorly served these same folks we wish to help.
As I talked about with Ms. Rouse, there's not only a disagreement about spending, there's also a disagreement about how you're going to pay for it. And one of the main...
They talk about raising taxes there. By the way, I got a couple more Super Chat contributions. Thank you, Matthew, for #1 fan Super Chat contribution. Then Chairsbed asking about AstraZeneca vaccine and releasing those to India. I can't remember if it was Cecilia Rouse or Anita Dunn, both who are talking for the Biden administration. One was talking about how, they don't have AstraZeneca vaccine in a warehouse somewhere that they can just release, but they have like options on it that they are looking into releasing to India, and we have more than enough vaccine for every American to get vaccinated, and now we're looking at distributing vaccine worldwide. So I hope that helps answer your question, Chairsbed, but I don't have that clip. But I do have one final clip, and this is John Barrasso from Wyoming, one of the reddest states. That's where Lynn Cheney's from. Also using some of these talking points, trillions and trillions of dollars, cradle to grave, like the dead Reaganist talking points in the final news clip that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Conference, good morning, sir. Let's go back to President Biden's speech on Wednesday. You've hammered the president's $2 trillion infrastructure proposal, as did Senator Tim Scott during the GOP response on Wednesday. What's the biggest sticking point for you?
Well, it's the trillions and trillions of dollars of reckless spending. When I look at this is a staggering amount of spending, like someone with a new credit card. And these are for things that we don't necessarily need. We certainly can't afford, but they're going to delight the liberal left of the party. It seems to me that this is a cradle to grave role of government, whether it's paying for child care for everyone, free college for everyone, and ultimately someone's going to have to pay for this. It's almost creating an addiction to spending. So it's either massive new debt to China, as well as massive taxing, probably the largest tax increase in 50 years. And anybody that says this is going to be on just the 1% or big corporations, I mean, that's just phony math. Americans understand that with this kind of spending and this kind of borrowing and taxing, everyone is going to get hit in their wallet.
Our new ABC Ipsos poll shows more than half of those polled willing to raise taxes if it will help the economy.
Well, I think people take a look at this and say, what is the impact on me? And when the Biden administration says it's just going to be on the wealthiest or just going to be on corporations, look, it's going to be seen anybody that earns a paycheck, small businesses, families. People are going to pay through expenses in their life with cost of living going up, and whether that's gasoline prices, grocery prices. And I will tell you, Democrats are also getting concerned, Martha, about all of this spending and borrowing, realizing that they're going to be held accountable in the 2022 election. And some Democrats publicly, but most privately, are saying this isn't sustainable. We cannot continue with this kind of reckless borrowing and spending, especially with the taxes coming out of a pandemic.
And on your point about Democrats, reportedly Biden and top Democrats are willing to make concessions or break the plan into chunks and are contemplating Senator Shelley Moore Capito's counteroffer of $568 billion. Could you get behind that?
Well, yes, we are working closely with the administration. We had 4 of us that presented this plan the other day. It is focused on core infrastructure, roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, things that...
Okay, enough. I can't hear him anymore. I can't listen anymore. But I think you get... I don't really buy the John Barrasso or the Bill Cassidy Republican Reaganist talking points about, government is bad and spending's bad and Democrats are bad, and I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I want to finish up the show. I did want to give you a Dash and Sandy clip from early this morning. I got them. I swear I could do this show twice as fast if I didn't spend all the time I do opening doors for Dash and Sandy. Here's Dash and Sandy like crossing each other at one door and then both going out the outside door. I put together in the Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the Dandy fans out there to end the show with over here.
We propose to pay for these 2 packages by raising the tax rate on corporations above its current level of 21%, but keeping it under the level we've been in with respect to the pandemic. We don't want to use up all of that fiscal space, and over the long run, deficits need to be contained to keep our federal finances on a sustainable basis. So I believe that we should pay for these historic investments. There will be a big return. I expect productivity to rise. There will be great returns from investing in research and development and enabling families.
And I said there'd be no Janet Yellen clip, but that was Janet Yellen, I think, in the background there. Wasn't that Janet Yellen? Anyway, that's the show for tonight. I will be back every Sunday for the rest of the month. And then I might be moving to this Monday media mix-up, or I think I might be calling it the Monday media mix-up around noon Pacific time on Mondays. I'll talk more about that in the coming weeks, but I think I've got dinner waiting, so I got to finish up the show. Thank you all for joining me, and until next week, or until I have some other reason to upload some other kind of video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.